All right. That's an interesting question about why the mind wanders away, but it's not a really valid question. The fact is that the mind is not running away from something, it's running away just running. They, in the old Buddhism, I'm not sure how old the term is, it didn't go all the way back to the Buddha, but it's centuries old, term called monkey mind. Now, the reality of monkeys is that they're probably more consistent than humans because they've got less things to jump to. I mean, they can jump to a tree and they can jump to a rock and they can jump to a worm and that kind of stuff. But look how much humans can jump, okay? That our world is, that we have created is vast and there's no end to it. Um, but this concept of monkey mind actually has the quality of wherever the mind lands, it's generally not satisfied. And so it jumps someplace else. So you could say, in fact, that the mind is looking for satisfaction and never finding it. It always brings up that song, looking for love in all the wrong places. But in fact, it's satisfaction that we're actually looking for. We're looking for safety, security, comfort, satisfaction. We're actually looking to come home, to find the place where we belong, and we never find it. And so we keep searching and keep looking and keep jumping and keep jumping. Now, for the beginner, intentionally going to wholesome thoughts is kind of a new thing for this monkey mind. And so it's already in the great big habit of jumping from here to there, so it's not going to stay long. And so this is why
Right.
the Buddha talks about applying the mind to the wholesome and then eventually learning to sustain the mind on the wholesome. But right now, the thing to do is every time you catch that the mind has wandered away, come back to the wholesome. Keep reapplying
Mm.
the wholesome. Keep throwing out the hindrances and coming into wholesome thoughts. Okay? If we keep practicing that, then as we're getting fairly good at it, then we can start to manage, can I sustain this? So that as soon as the monkey mind starts to wiggle to jump, we can bring it back very quickly or immediately. Don't hardly give it more than one or two mind moments, and then we bring it back to the wholesome.
Mm.
Like, never mind. And that way we can sustain it. But in the beginning, it's a matter of reapplying, coming back again, that the mind is going to wander away. No reason to ask any questions about it. That's not only the habit of the mind, but in a really important way, it's built into the DNA. The centuries and generation after generation after generation of humans, all of whom have been dissatisfied, all of whom have had monkey minds. You can see that it's pretty well built right into our DNA to keep jumping around and changing the subject and looking for more satisfaction and not finding it, and so looking for some more. So that even when we find the satisfaction, the monkey mind doesn't even recognize that yet
Mm.
because it's such in a habit of jumping and jumping and jumping. So I guess that would be an interesting answer to that question of why. Is the answer is that it's built into our instincts, and that much of what the Buddha teaches is to train those instincts. Because With all of the education that you've had, you've learned to read, except that very few people can read because they can't pay attention to what they're reading because the mind will keep jumping around. Have you ever seen that happen? That you're reading something
Yeah.
long and that you at the end of the page you recognize that, hey, I don't read everything that's on that page. You get to a new paragraph and we don't know what's going on because our eyes are on the page going down the last paragraph, but the mind was jumping around thinking about it. We can read something and then we start thinking about it. The eyes will continue to move around along the page, but we're not really following it because the monkey mind is jumping all over the place. We've never been trained
Or
to do, okay, that in fact, the word concentration is often applied to this, but the word concentration has so much other garbage along with it that we prefer not to use the word concentration and instead use the word repetition. To keep coming back and keep coming back and keep coming back. There's an actually interesting experiment that you can try. You've probably been in this situation before, but it wasn't as an experiment, and that is to have some talk going, some talk radio, some uh, event happening, maybe a documentary, maybe a YouTube that you listen to, and at the same time reading. If you've got a book or you've got an article out and you're reading and you're listening to talk, you can generally do, most people do neither one, but can you move back and forth intentionally from book to talk, book to talk, book, do it often enough where you're actually getting the benefit both start watching your
sorry,
mind jump like that.
you cut out in the last couple seconds. I didn't hear the last part of what you said.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, how long was I out?
Just like 2 seconds, 3 seconds. You were talking about switching back and forth, but I didn't hear the last part of what you said.
Yes. So going back and forth between the audio and the visual, that in fact you're using two different parts of the brain for that.
Mm.
That the audio system is connected to the mid cortex, the temporal lobes, the frontal lobes, what the old psychologists call the mammalian brain, which is where most of our auditory stuff is. And surprisingly enough, almost all the rules are stored as audio. So all of our Sila Bhatta Paramasa, all the attachment to the rites, rules, and rituals are often audio, and reading is done visually. That in fact, what we do with the reading is the words on the book are actually converted to audio,
Oh, really? Interesting.
and that the more strongly that's done, then the slower the reader, because he's got to change, he's got to read every word as if it were a spoken word. And
Mm.
speed readers learn to read the words without it being converted into audio. Okay? So that's something that you can try to see how the mind actually does jump back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And that means then that once you can see that, you can begin to train it. You can eventually begin to train the mind so that it can stay, um, let us say, stay put. But let me use this analogy. This is the object, and this is the mind, okay? And most people
Yeah.
do it like this. They touch it occasionally. And when people try to practice concentration, they think it's what they're doing is push it really hard. And the right practice is to touch, 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 touch. And in fact, that pushing very hard is what you would call concentration. But instead of really being concentrated, they push really hard and then push really hard and then push really hard. And so they're not getting anywhere and they wear themselves out. They're working too hard. And the right way to do is to touch and to touch and to touch. And pretty soon we can get it to land there and become stable. And then we can bring it back out. Stable. We don't need the object anymore. The mind can just be stable.
Without focusing on anything in particular.
Without focusing on any particular thing, or that we can focus on something and focus on something and focus on something and focus on something without it jumping around. That this is the way that the mind normally works is because we're never trained to get the mind to settle down. It's constantly jumping and jumping and jumping. And when I'm moving my finger like that, that's a kind of an indication about how fast the mind is moving. In fact, the mind is jumping faster than I can move my finger. And so this analogy may help you, is to touch, and to touch, and to touch, and to touch until you can get it stable. And then you can draw it back out, and the mind will remain stable. And so this is what we're actually practicing in Anapanasati, is keep coming back to the wholesome, keep coming back to the wholesome, keep coming back to the wholesome. And pretty soon, it's like this, and then it begins to settle down so that we can stay stable.
Yeah, on that note, like sometimes I feel during my practice that the wholesome thoughts like slow down, or like I don't need to think them as much, and there's like I just focus on the pleasant sensations or something. Like, do I need to keep the consistent wholesome thoughts coming in, or is it okay if it like there's like periods in between the thoughts?
Yeah, if you can keep coming back, that's the way to do it.
Okay.
Is to keep coming back. Hang on.
Sure.
So I'm back again. The mind was never trained. But in fact, as an infant, our fingers are not trained. Have you ever seen a tender infant or a young baby, let us say, under the age of 1?
Yeah.
They can't coordinate their hands. They can't really see anything. That it takes a long time. And then when we start school, we can't hold a pencil. We have to train the hand to do that. But for some reason in our school system, they've never figured out that it's really the mind that needs to be trained. And so we're trained to use a computer, but we use that computer sporadically because the mind that we're using the computer with is not trained. This is part of the reason why there's so many automobile accidents, is simply people are not paying. They know how to drive a car, In fact, they take it for granted that they know how to drive a car. And so they're lollygagging, they're thinking about something, they're rubbernecking, they're on their cell phone, they're chewing a sandwich, they're fussing at their kids. And that's where the accidents happen. Actually, nowadays, it's even worse than that because we have this new thing, this new kid on the block called road rage. Back in the 1950s, people were really polite with each other when they crashed into each other. And so I think that the modern society needs that kind of mental training now more than ever. And so that's the kind of a question that you were asking is why is the mind a monkey mind? The answer is that it was never trained. It was already a monkey mind. When you were born, it was a monkey mind. In fact, it wasn't hardly functioning at all when you were born. So, with that, we can recognize, okay, well, the mind does need to be changed. It needs to be trained. And the way of the training is repetition, practice, over and over and over and over again. For some reason, that's one of the most important messages that we have for Anapanasati, and so few people actually get that message. It just requires repetitive work. One of the examples I use is Arthur Rubinstein. Have you ever heard of him? He's dead now, but he was a world famous musician. And once one woman came up to him and said to him, I would give half my life to play the piano the way you do. And he looked at her and he mused and he said, yep, that's about what it cost. It's about half the life, okay? If you're willing to put half your life into Anapanasati, you will get enormous great fruit out of it. There was actually a story. He's long dead now. His name was Franz Liszt. You probably haven't heard from him unless you're in deep musical circles. And Franz Liszt was well known to be the best pianist in the world. He lived as a monk. He lived in a chapel. And he spent more than 8 hours a day in practicing the piano, and another 8 hours a day practicing meditation. And that kind of dedication, that over and over and over again practice, will get someone up to that world-class notoriety. That was, in fact, what they got from the Buddha. The reason that we remember him 2,500 years ago was because he was high-quality, world-class human being. But he had to practice. He practiced and he practiced. Every day he would sit, not doing anything, because actually, eventually the practice becomes just play. It's no longer work. It's playful, but they keep doing it. So the question is can you begin to play with your practice, to begin to enjoy it more and more, so you spend more and more time doing it, so that you become dedicated, enthusiastic, eager for watching the mind and how it works. And so that's the pep talk, is to start spending more time doing this.
I will. And that doesn't mean just formal sitting practice, right? It just means all the time.
It doesn't have to be a formal sitting practice.
Yeah.
You can practice on the bus. You can practice in your easy chair. You can practice in front of the computer. You can practice while you were watching TV a minute ago. You can practice while reading a book. Practice, practice, practice. And in fact, when you're reading the book, keep your mind focused on the book. Don't let the mind wander away into thinking about what's on the book. Read the book. That's practice. When you're out driving, pay attention. Look down the road. Look behind you. Keep your mind and eyes alert. You won't have any accidents, or you won't cause them. You may get sideswiped, but that's because somebody else is not paying attention. So there's all kinds of practice. In fact, it's a well-known thing that monks who drive mindfully are very excellent drivers. There's another point about that, and that is that very, very rich people who want a chauffeur, do you know who they want to have as a chauffeur? Retired race car drivers.
Mm.
Why is that? Is because if a race car driver is good enough to ride a whole bunch of races and then get a lot of money and retire, that means that he was able to pay attention. He didn't get killed out on that racetrack.
Right.
And so wealthy people who want a driver who is very safe and can manage that limousine very well, they want to have a race car driver as a chauffeur. So they're willing to pay, $1 million a year for a chauffeur. Why? Because he knows how to pay attention to the road.
Mm-hmm.
All right? He's trained himself to do that. Can you imagine that you're out on the Formula One, you yourself driving down the road, you know that road very well, you've checked it out, you've walked it even, and you're going around it over and over and over again, and some little old lady steps out right in front of you. If you have the thought, old lady, you ought not be in the road, you just killed her. You got to have fast reaction time. That little old lady comes out on that road. You got to get out of the way.
Yeah. All the current Formula One drivers have really crazy reaction times.
Mm-hmm. The reaction time is, in fact, can be trained.
Mm-hmm.
If we get out of the way of the thoughts that we have in the way and just act immediately. And in fact, that's the same thing with those who become black belts, fourth Dan. Very fast reaction time, down to about 200 milliseconds. They have timed cats. Cats are down at about 65 milliseconds. Cats have very, very fast reaction time, which I guess means that they don't have much to think about. So yes, reaction time. Can you see that the mind is wandering away from that book you're reading and bring it back? Can you really pay attention to what you're doing? Really focus on it. So that would be the practice. Whatever you're doing, do it with all thy heart, thy mind, and thy soul. Pay attention to what you're doing. Put your whole moment into it, your whole life. This is correct practice. Really apply the mind. And that's a training. We have to train for that. Like at football. 99% of winning the game at football is the football practice. So 99% of living one's life is practice. And if people don't practice, they wind up living a pretty messy life. Because the mind is all over the place, not paying attention. Have automobile accidents, they drink, they cuss, they get angry, all the ordinary things. They beat their wife, they become cops, really stupid things. But when one is really mindful because they're actually paying attention, they wind up having a really good life. Great fruit, great benefit, the Buddha says, for practicing Anapanasati. So, can you remember that? Can you remember that you can practice any time that you can remember?
Yeah, for sure.
So, start remembering often.
I'll remember.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and finish this call now, and you go practice.
I will. I will. Thank you.
All righty. See you later.
Bye.